Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? The first news this week is health related and relates to the World Health Organization's declaration that the Ebola outbreak in eastern Congo is a public health emergency of international concern. The last time they made this sort of declaration was during the 2014-2016 outbreak in West Africa. That particular outbreak led to the death of 11,000 people. The designation, in theory, encourages, if not requires, greater levels of vigilance and mobilization in those countries that could provide support. It is among the highest level of alert that the World Health Organization can put nations on notice about. The person identified as Patient Zero was identified in Goma, a major city on the border with Rwanda. It has tens of thousands of people crossing the border with Rwanda on a daily basis. And Patient Zero himself appears to be a pastor who traveled between cities. This means that there is a considered risk that he may have given the disease to a number of other individuals along the way. As a consequence, the World Health Organization is attempting to track the people he made contact with during his travels. With any luck, this most recent outbreak will be an opportunity for a pharmaceutical company that recently developed a vaccine to deploy it again and show its efficacy in the field. This is also matched with a local reticence in some cases to accept vaccinations due to a variety of cultural, social, and misinformation reasons. As a result, there is a belief that a significant portion of the cases of Ebola are not reported to health authorities, and as a consequence, no treatment is given, and these populations act as a reservoir for the disease until it burns out. This problem is compounded by the fact that armed groups and violent locals have attacked medical practitioners, particularly those from abroad, after the outbreak of Ebola. These attacks have left 7 of the medical practitioners dead. Despite these problems, both the Congo and Rwanda have strong systems in place to deal with an Ebola outbreak. The Congo, based on its experience in the last outbreak, and Rwanda, because it has a very well-established and strong healthcare system that can deal with these patients on an as-needs basis. The problem are the other countries that surround the Congo. Most of these either lack readiness, lack a healthcare system, or lack strong border control that will allow transmission of the disease, or at least diseased peoples, with little ability to intercept them and give them medical care as needed. This is best exemplified by the fact that in 2 cases, one patient made it as far as Dubai and another to China before they were identified as either carrying or infected with the virus. In other unrelated health news, a large population study using 2 million individuals has found that autism is fundamentally a heritable disease. The researchers put forward their belief that 80% of autism diagnoses are heritable and that this fact can be replicated across populations in different countries. What they've also found is that there may be modest differences in what could lead to autism between countries. When you combine this with other studies looking at the effects of vaccines on autism diagnoses and diagnosis rates, this only further solidifies the fact that autism is a genetic condition, not exacerbated by vaccines, not caused by exposure to vaccines, not caused by the parents' exposure to vaccines. In a related piece of news, one study investigated the association of transgenderism, non-binary identities, and autism. The researchers found indications that transgender and non-binary individuals were more likely to exhibit autistic traits and behaviors than the general population. This is important to note, as there is an increasing diagnosis of gender dysphoria in the general population at present. Much like in the past, there has been concern about an increase in the rate of autism diagnoses. These two events are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but the possibility that there is overlap between the populations involved. The researchers found that 14% of the transgender and non-binary population they studied had a diagnosis of autism. Further to that, another 28% just made the cutoff point for an autism diagnosis. This means that up to 42% of those who have been diagnosed as having a gender dysphoria or a similar condition may in fact be presenting in an atypical manner, making their diagnoses, one way or the other, far more nebulous than it currently is. Another key finding of this study is that most of the individuals that they found who would have been diagnosed as having gender dysphoria, but also met the conditions for an autism diagnosis, were female. If you have seen some of the previous videos on autism, you may remember that there is a significant change in neurodevelopment in the early years of life for children with autism. Autism, as a general rule, seems to affect males at a far greater rate. It would appear that there is another degree of overlap between those individuals who are experiencing gender dysphoria and possibly a neurological element. Based on this and the other behaviors for autistic individuals, the researchers advise that doctors should seek to get an autism diagnosis first and then adapt their consultation process, as autistic individuals are more likely to seek a clear-cut and undeniable solution to a question such as their gender identity. In far less controversial news, Michigan Medicine's Health Lab put out an article this week that reports that opioids are being prescribed for sprained ankles. As most people are aware, opioids are a very strong analgesic. As a general rule, opioids would be an excessive form of pain relief for a sprained ankle. When you combine this common practice with the opioid epidemic, you are going against best medical practices. Consider that in some surgeries, patients may be prescribed an opioid pain relief for up to a week afterwards. Nearly 12% of the patients in this study were being given opioid prescriptions and filling them within 7 days of their diagnoses. More than 8% of these had never had a prescription for opioids before this. For clarification, should you find yourself having a sprained ankle, medical care should be sought, but in the meantime, paracetamol or ibuprofen will generally be more than enough. You are likely to be advised by your doctor to rest, put ice on your injury, compress it with something like a bandage, and elevate it. These 4 points, along with pain relief, should resolve the injury over a period of about a week. Opioids never enter into this equation. In what will be medical news soon, the US Air Force has a warning for the many people who have said that they want to storm Area 51 to see aliens. An Area 51 spokesperson has said, "It is an open training range for the US Air Force, and we would discourage anyone from trying to come into the area where we train American armed forces." This whole situation, as much as it was intended to be a joke, is not helped from a 2017 paper that confirmed the existence of a $22 million program that was intended to analyze anomalous aerospace threats. This project, along with Area 51's reputation for aliens, has not really helped. The fact that most documentation indicates it has only ever been used for secret aircraft testing only adds to the mystery. Until September 20th, we won't know exactly how this goes, but given the signage around the site, clear statements from the American military, and the capacity for human stupidity, this may end badly. In astronomical news, India's attempt to launch a lunar lander has been halted after a technical issue. India's space program tweeted that they had detected an anomaly in their system, and as a measure of abundant precaution, had decided not to deploy the rocket. If they had been successful, it would have made India one of only 4 countries to have landed on the moon successfully. Others have attempted, such as Israel, but have not been successful. India's success has largely been driven by their homegrown technology that has been cheaper to produce and deploy than that which other countries use, or to buy from those countries. India's caution starkly contrasts with that of SpaceX. Their Mars rocket prototype recently exploded in a fiery mess on a launch platform. The test that led to the loss of the Starhopper was intended to prove that it could hover in place for a short time before they would move on to the next stage of testing. Unfortunately, this setback may leave that on hold for a while yet. Fortunately, the Starhopper itself has been relatively undamaged from this. According to reports, it is made from stainless steel like kitchen pots and pans. This would explain why the burning methane fuel ultimately has not put it out of action. Harking back 50 years, this week we celebrate Apollo 11's landing on the moon. 50 years ago, astronauts with technology less powerful than your phone, even many modern calculators, traveled from Earth on a massive fireball to the moon, landed there, and then returned to Earth. Assuming you are not a moon conspiracy theorist. From this, NASA and other groups have been putting out regular videos and content celebrating this event, a list of which will be found below in the description. Coming back to Earth now and looking at animals that make you go no. Researchers from Kyoto University found a small 29mm marine worm called Leocritides cumura aurum. It can produce sounds around 150 decibels. Humans can hear sound as low as 10 and as high as 130. Beyond that, it can become very painful and will damage your hearing. It is a sound on par with mantis shrimp. While these animals are not as loud as the mantis shrimp, they're also far less well understood, having only been described in 2017. This particular discovery, whilst interesting, isn't really well understood without context. Next is a case study. A man went blind in one eye after wearing contact lenses in the shower for years. The man in question wrote the article for the newspaper he works for, describing how he had made the decision to wear contact lenses and, following his usual routine, would be wearing them in the shower, not knowing that he was not meant to do this. The reason he was not meant to wear his contact lenses in the shower is that he was diagnosed with the Campanomoeba keratitis in his right eye. It is an infection caused by an amoeba in water that specifically attacks the cornea. Eventually, it got so bad that even with antibiotics, he still went blind in his eye. In far less terrifying and unpleasant news, one study has found that sexual images are just as arousing for women as for men, something that any marketing expert could tell you. The argument has been for quite a while that men tend to react more to visual stimuli than women. This study is meant to challenge that. The researchers used data from roughly 2,000 people and found that the way the brain reacted to this stimulus was not different between men and women. They found that it was the actions afterwards that brought about a significant difference. This difference might be elucidated by research that could find a better resolution examination of the way the brain reacts. These studies were only able to use gross anatomical differences, specific regions of the brain, not necessarily specific regions within those regions themselves, and this may explain why men take the same stimulus and react very differently to women. In news relating to science, data, and computing, Alan Turing is being honoured as the face of a new banknote being released in the UK. Alan Turing is seen as something to the effect of the father of modern computing. His work during World War II as a code breaker helped to resolve the Enigma machine. However, what happened to him later on in life undercuts the work he did. Alan Turing was a homosexual. Later in life, he was convicted of this and offered very limited choices, one of them being the equivalent of chemical castration. Following acceptance of this, rather than going to prison, he eventually committed suicide. To honour his efforts and pioneering, the Bank of England has put his face on the £50 note. In his time, Turing's conviction was considered scandalous, and the world has moved on significantly since, with relative equality for all now. In modern scandals, the Swedish government has chosen to take over research fraud investigations, and this decision follows the failure of many Swedish universities, and particularly the research organization the Karolinska Institute, who have failed to adequately address concerns brought to their attention. As unfortunate as it is, the Swedish government has had to become involved because the Swedish universities, despite being told about their failures, despite having had many opportunities to address them, and having repeatedly failed to do so, are now being regulated. This regulation could be in many respects compared to that for loot crates within gaming. The internal control mechanisms for the Swedish universities were brought to light after probes that began in 2017. The first one of these began with a paper that examined microplastic pollution and fish. These were compounded through further and latter studies that were found to be flawed and in many cases fraudulent. And the problem with this is that the committees that investigate these matters internally are not binding on the university, and in some cases this has led to high-profile and otherwise famous researchers being given a pass on mispractice. It is expected that by January 2020, this new department will come into effect. It will have 10 researchers from a variety of fields who know what they are talking about and will be able to interpret charges or accusations of mispractice. Hopefully we'll know more by the middle of next year, where we will see how effective this new government department is that will deal with all cases and all accusations of misconduct, such as fabrication or falsification of data, plagiarism, serious research misconduct, and more. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.